One of the more iconic examples of a twist end that puts the whole of the game in a new perspective was the gentle twist towards the end of the original BioShock. Well, there is a revelation that the actor character Jack was born in Rapture and is Ryan's son. What puts the whole plot into perspective is that he had no say in anything from the very beginning. Not only does this explain how Jack can get where he wants it, but the manipulation Atlas makes in the background of the player has a whole new meaning that can change the player's perspective on how they approach certain plot points in subsequent games. Prey is similar to the BioShock in many important ways, most notably the connection between the disembodied voice that drives the player, but not the kernel as Prey's protagonist Morgan seems to be. Towards the end of Prey it was revealed that Morgan volunteered for the neuromod procedure, not only knowing very well what the consequences were, but also that the real Morgan had been dead for a while. The player-controlled version of Morgan is actually a Tiffin that has placed the memories and experiences of human Morgan Yu into them, a fact that places the first few hours of the game in a bigger context in later games. Like its fierce rivalry at the time of its release, Infamous' prototype story is a bit complicated thanks to a small fraction of the continuous flash advances that show Alex Mercer talking to an unknown soldier at the end of the game. Throughout the game, the player learns more and more about the Blacklight virus, but not until the end when everything comes together and the story becomes more meaningful. A few key moments at the beginning of the story make even more meaningful for a second and third game, with additional information about who Alex spoke to, the history of Elizabeth Green, and it was revealed that Alex was the person who started the Blacklight epidemic. Game. Quantum Conundrum, a lesser-known first-person puzzle game in the same vein as Portal games, sees the player control of Professor Quadrangle's 12-year-old nephew who has passed most of the game without being trapped in an unknown dimension. Memory of how you got there. At the very end of the game, it turns out that Quadrangle's experiments resulted in distorted reality taking over his home, and he remembers that he deliberately escaped pocket-size to keep himself from being killed. Bringing this knowledge to future games adds much-needed context to various areas of the game that were quite confusing the first time around. Inspired by the so-called science and strange inexplicable events in the world, it is not surprising that it takes some time for players to understand what is happening in the world of Control. Aside from the sheer amount of jargon and technical chatter that is important to Jesse as well as to the actor, it's easy to get lost in the lore and background of the Federal Office of Control. However, the source of Jesse's powers is the origins of Hiss, and Doctor finally start to make sense, until it is revealed that all of their realities could be a concoction of Alan Wake, while he was finally stranded in Dark Place to escape the nightmare world. Games that focus around time travel tend to be a bit confusing by their nature, as these are often told in order and force the player to put things together in the correct order. Among the many different endings players can achieve in Chrono Trigger, as well as the always bouncing nonsense of characters both big and small, this title is one of the more complex and confusing science fiction games out there. Before the rise of the internet, finding every possible ending was quite a task for any player, and would become even more difficult due to the length of the game as it is a fairly long RPG experience. Burning with the original version of No Man's Sky, players may find it hard to believe that the game actually has a coherent storyline that adds much-needed context to the title for players to follow now. While the story is quite simple on paper, exploring and completing it for the first time reveals the world and the characters. Reaching the center of the galaxy in the original version will simply bring the player to the new one, but with the new story content, it turns out that the entire game is a simulation created by the entity named Atlas, and reaching the center. Resetting the simulation is the only way they can survive. Not having this context does not detract from the overall gaming experience, but adds to the knowledge of the game, and allows players to understand an otherwise confusing game cycle. When Horizon Zero Dawn was first released, one of the biggest questions on players' minds was how the world looked with highly advanced robot dinosaurs alongside primitive, tribal human cultures. Players will learn about the true nature of Project Zero Dawn, the purpose of Hades, Gaia and other AI entities, and where Aloy fits the story. The player will also finally find out why some machines are designed to look like dinosaurs, as Gaia is teaching AI empathy, while in a conversation with Dr. Sobek expressing their regret that they never saw them themselves. As with its predecessors Drakengard and Nier, Automata has multiple endings that add much needed context to the world and the motivations of its characters. However, like the previous ones, many aspects of the story don't start to make sense until the player completes the game multiple times and plays with the experiences of multiple characters, as the few recurring characters have their own adventures away from 2D you cannot see around for the first time. Many of Hideo Kojima's sci-fi works are downright confusing at the best of times, but there are notable exceptions to this, such as the Zone of the Enders series. One game that remains confusing even after you finish it is Death Stranding. Playing the role of a deliveryman traveling cargo across vast terrains, the game leaves the player a few words in sci-fi jargon at once. The story and characters only really come together at the end of the game. However, even after you finish the story of Death Stranding, the ending will likely raise more questions than it answers, and it may require a few more games before everything falls into place. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked the video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the page.